if you're not colorblind, and you can see the difference, the yellow one is the same direction turning matrix. In the convention that I have put it on paper, if you translate it to north, south, east, west, the north position is clockwise, the west position is underhand, the south position is counterclockwise, and the east position is overhand. If you look at the two crosshairs on it, the crosshairs are intended to represent the line of your hips. So if we think of, and this diagram is predominantly, while I would say the basic rules of poi engage with the 6 planes of a box, the front, the back, the right side, the left side, the floor, and the ceiling. While it engages with those, for the purposes of this diagram, presently, we are talking only about the 4 vertical walls, the right wall, the left wall, the front wall, and the back wall. So when we are doing what is called wall plane moves, or front plane and back plane, in same direction, so in same direction, the north position I'm calling clockwise because both of the poi are going in the clockwise direction. Now the sensation with the right hand is underhand. You generate from underneath. The sensation with the left hand is overhand, where you're going over the top, but they are both clockwise in that same direction. Your hips are parallel to the plane of the poi. This is also true in the other so-called wall plane, or what's now my front plane, or what was my back plane here, where the poi relative to the artist, okay, so my personal naming convention is I name the direction based on what you see on the plane as you are looking at it. So I would not call this, actually it's easier to demonstrate from here. So I would call this clockwise. I would not call this clockwise. I would call it counterclockwise because I would turn and face it and name it based on what I'm seeing as I'm facing it. So I might say you start in clockwise here and then flip it behind your back to explain how to get there, because that's easier than saying counterclockwise behind your back. And I think it makes more sense to explain it that way. But how I name it is based on what I see. Now, from your perspective, looking at me, this looks clockwise and this looks clockwise because the objective direction remains the same. So always when you're on the outside looking in, it's going to look the same regardless of which plane it is. However, my subjective direction changes. And this is perhaps the best example of what that looks like I've ever seen or utilized myself. So if you look at this bottle, actually, if you look at this bottle, which way is the bottle turning from your perspective? So yes, this is clockwise. It's going clockwise from your perspective. Now I'm not going to do anything different except I'm going to turn it with my thumbs, and now I'm going to rotate my body 180 degrees. Which way is it turning now from your perspective? You'll notice it. Yes, you'll notice it's counterclockwise. Now the bottle still objectively is turning the same way no matter which way I face. You are the label. If the label's looking that way, it's going to look like it's turning clockwise. If the label's looking this way, it's going to look like it's turning counterclockwise, even though from the outside perspective looking in, there's no difference. One of the reasons I think that bottle metaphor is useful is if you get to a point where you're trying to educate other people about how this is different than this, when they're seeing the same thing, now you have a really great physical example that you can show them that I think helps solidify it. What I was getting at here is, if we're in clockwise or in counterclockwise, the front plane or the back plane, you'll notice that my hip line, the plane of my hips, which is the x-axis on the diagram, is going this way, and it's parallel to the plane of the poi. So if you look at the diagram, the crosshair, the place in the center of the crosshair is where I am standing. The line, the x-axis, is representing the line of my hips. The arrow represents how I'm facing. So if the arrow is pointing to the south position, you'll see counterclockwise. If the arrow is pointing to the north position, you'll see clockwise. In both cases, my hip line is the x-axis. Versus if my head is facing, so the arrow is meant to represent my nose, So my nose is facing to the east position, and my hip line is the y-axis. This is what I call side plane overhand. And if my nose is facing the west position and my hip line is the y-axis, this is what I would call underhand. Now, other people will call this is backward, and they'll call this forward, or forward and reverse. And I know that other people will call the side plane wheel plane. I personally think wheel plane is confusing because in the old days, we used to call this the wheel of death before buzzsaw stuck. And I think personally this looks more like a wheel than this does, or this does. So I prefer to name it based on the orientation relative to your body. Oh, it's on my side. And then another part of my naming convention is when my right poi is spinning on the right side, I would call it the home side. When the right poi is spinning on the left side, I would call it the away side. This is true if I'm doing it in a wall plane or wheel plane, which I just was doing. So when I'm doing it side plane like this, home, away, home, away. So same is true for the left hand, home, away. But then this is also true in the wall plane, right? So this is home, this is away. This is home, this is away. So for example, if I'm teaching a 4-petal anti-spin flower, away, top, home, bottom, away, top, home, bottom, away, top, home, bottom. That's the breakdown of the actual diagram itself.